"This old man is just the waiter," my son-in-law introduced me to the family during the wedding. My daughter just laughed. That's when someone shouted, "I saw him in Forbes." Everyone went pale. My son-in-law didn't know who I was and didn't know who had paid for the ceremony. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought my daughter's wedding day would be the day my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Standing in that ornate church, watching Sarah walk down the aisle in a dress that cost more than most people's cars, I felt pride swell in my chest. At 63, I'd worked my entire life to give her everything she ever wanted. Today was supposed to be the culmination of all those years of sacrifice. The ceremony was beautiful, exactly what Sarah had dreamed of since she was a little girl. 200 guests filled every pew, the flowers were perfect, and the string quartet played like angels. I had made sure every detail was flawless, even if no one knew I was the one behind it all. That's how I'd always preferred it, working quietly in the background, never seeking the spotlight. Samuel looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo as he waited at the altar. I'll admit, I had my reservations about him from the beginning. There was something about the way he carried himself, a certain arrogance that rubbed me wrong. But Sarah loved him, and that was all that mattered to me. At least, that's what I told myself. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception hall. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting warm light over tables draped in ivory silk. The band was setting up, and waiters circulated with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a week. Everything was perfect, just as I'd planned it. That's when Samuel's family arrived for the formal introductions. His parents, Robert and Patricia Hendricks, were old money types from Connecticut, the kind of people who measured worth by pedigree and social standing. Samuel's mother wore a diamond necklace that caught the light every time she moved, and his father had that look of a man who'd never worked a day of manual labor in his life. "Sarah, darling," Patricia said, air-kissing my daughter's cheeks, "you look absolutely radiant. Now we simply must meet your family." Sarah's smile was brilliant as she gestured toward me. "Of course, this is my father, Robert." I stepped forward, extending my hand to Samuel's father. I was wearing my best suit, nothing flashy, but well-tailored and appropriate. I've never been one for showing off. "Pleasure to meet you, sir," I said warmly. That's when Samuel stepped in, and my world tilted on its axis. "Oh, this old guy." Samuel laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "He's just the waiter, showed up early and insisted on staying for the ceremony. You know how these service people can be." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, hand still extended, watching as Samuel's parents' expressions shifted from polite interest to barely concealed disdain. Around us, other guests had overheard, and I could feel their eyes on me, studying my clothes, my weathered hands, making their own judgments. But what destroyed me wasn't the humiliation from strangers. It was Sarah's reaction. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable giggle, but a genuine, amused laugh, as if Samuel had told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. "Oh, Samuel," she said, touching his arm affectionately, "you're terrible." But her tone was playful, not corrective. She wasn't defending me. She was enjoying this. I felt the blood drain from my face. My own daughter, the little girl I'd carried on my shoulders, who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories, was standing there letting her new husband humiliate me in front of 200 people. "I see," Robert Hendricks said, his tone now cold and dismissive. He turned away from me without another word, as if I'd suddenly become invisible. Patricia followed suit, her nose slightly raised as she moved on to greet other family members. "Well, Sarah, your real family must be around here somewhere." "Actually," Sarah said, and for a moment I thought she might correct the misunderstanding. "My father passed away when I was young. I don't have much family left." The lie was so casual, so effortless, that it took my breath away. I was standing right there, alive and breathing, and my daughter had just erased me from existence. Samuel nodded sympathetically. It's been hard on her, growing up without a father figure. That's why she gets attached to the help sometimes. They become like family to her. I watched my daughter nod along with this fabrication, saw her accept comfort from Samuel's mother for a loss that was pure fiction. The room suddenly felt too hot, too crowded. The music was too loud, the lights too bright. Everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Sarah was crumbling around me. I excused myself quietly, not that anyone was paying attention to me anymore. Walking to the men's room, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked like exactly what they thought I was. An aging man in a simple suit, with calloused hands and silver hair. Nothing about my appearance screamed wealth or success. I'd always dressed modestly, driven modest cars, lived in a comfortable but not ostentatious house. I believed in humility, in letting your work speak for itself. But as I stood there, watching water drip from my hands as I gripped the marble sink, I wondered if my humility had been a mistake. Had I been so quiet about my success that even my own daughter didn't respect what I'd accomplished? When I returned to the reception, Samuel was regaling a group of guests with stories about his business ventures. He worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm, nothing spectacular, but he spoke about it like he was running Fortune 500 companies. The key to success, he was saying, is knowing your place in the world and not reaching beyond your means. Too many people today think they deserve more than they've earned. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a man who'd never earned a penny of what was paying for his wedding, talking about people reaching beyond their means. Sarah stood beside him, nodding along, playing the role of the supportive wife. When she caught my eye across the room, she gave me a small wave, as if I were indeed just friendly staff she was acknowledging. That wave broke something inside me that I knew could never be repaired. As the evening wore on, I watched my daughter dance with her new husband, watched her laugh at his jokes, watched her beam as guests congratulated her on landing such a successful man. And through it all, I remained invisible, just another face in the crowd, treated by my own flesh and blood like I was exactly what Samuel had claimed, hired help who'd overstayed their welcome. The worst part was realizing this wasn't sudden. This wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment on Sarah's part. The ease with which she'd played along, the smoothness of her lies, told me this was calculated. She was ashamed of me, had always been ashamed of me, and tonight she'd finally found a way to erase that embarrassment. Standing in that beautiful reception hall, surrounded by luxury I'd paid for, watching my daughter celebrate a life I'd made possible, I felt more alone than I had since my wife died 15 years ago. But I had no idea that before the night was over, everything was about to change in ways none of us could have imagined. The morning after the wedding, I sat in my study looking at the stack of receipts and bank statements spread across my desk. Every line item told the same story: a father who'd given everything to ensure his daughter's happiness, and a daughter who'd chosen to pretend he didn't exist. The wedding alone had cost me $150,000. Not just the ceremony and reception, but everything. Sarah's dress, the photographer, the flowers, even the limousine that brought her to the church. Samuel thought his parents had paid for everything. Sarah had let him believe it. I picked up the receipt for the engagement ring, $25,000 for a 2-carat diamond that Samuel had supposedly saved months to afford. What he didn't know was that 3 days before he proposed, Sarah had called me in tears. Samuel wanted to propose, but couldn't afford the ring she'd dreamed of. Could I help just this once? Just this once had become the theme of our relationship over the past 5 years. It started small, as these things always do. Sarah needed help with her student loans after college. Then it was the down payment on her apartment. Then Samuel lost his job and needed help with rent. Each time Sarah would call with that tone in her voice, not quite begging, but close enough. And each time I'd transfer the money without question. But Sarah had been clever about it. She made me promise to never mention the payments to Samuel. "It would hurt his pride, Daddy," she'd said. "You know how men are about money? He needs to feel like he's providing for me." At the time, it seemed reasonable. Samuel did have an ego, and I understood not wanting to emasculate him. I'd grown up poor myself, knew what it felt like to struggle, to feel less than. If I could spare him that feeling while helping my daughter, why wouldn't I? So I'd become the invisible benefactor. When Samuel got a promotion that came with a substantial raise, it was actually me supplementing his salary through Sarah. When they moved to the beautiful two-bedroom apartment in the better part of town, Samuel thought his credit had finally improved enough to qualify for it. He didn't know I'd co-signed the lease and was paying the difference between what he could afford and what Sarah wanted. The receipts told the whole story. Car payments when Samuel's old Honda finally died, $500 a month for 3 years. Medical bills when Sarah had her appendix removed, $12,000 that insurance didn't cover. Vacation to Europe last summer that Samuel thought he'd saved for $8,000 that I'd quietly transferred to Sarah's account. I'd kept meticulous records, not because I was planning to ask for repayment, but because my accountant insisted on proper documentation for my taxes. Looking at the numbers now, I calculated that over 5 years, I'd given Sarah and Samuel nearly $400,000. They were living a lifestyle that required a household income of at least $200,000 a year, when Samuel's actual salary was closer to $75,000. The irony was devastating. Samuel, who'd dismissed me as just the waiter, was living a life entirely funded by the man he'd humiliated. Every bite of food he ate, every shirt on his back, every night in their comfortable bed, all of it paid for by me. But what hurt more than the money was understanding why Sarah had hidden my contributions. It wasn't really about protecting Samuel's pride. It was about protecting her image. I remembered the first time Sarah brought Samuel home for dinner. This was 3 years ago, before they were engaged. I'd made my usual casual meal, nothing fancy, just a good home-cooked dinner. My house is comfortable but modest. I drive a 10-year-old pickup truck. I wear jeans and flannel shirts on weekends. To look at me, you'd never guess I'd built a construction company from nothing and sold it for $50 million. During dinner, Samuel had made several comments about blue-collar types and how important it was to elevate yourself beyond your upbringing. He talked about his business degree, his career goals, his vision for the kind of life he wanted to provide for Sarah. All very admirable, except it was all talk backed by my money. After he left that night, Sarah had sat me down for what she called a serious conversation. "Daddy," she'd said, "I need you to know how much I love you, but Samuel comes from a different world. His family has expectations about success and status. It might be better if you didn't mention your business when you're around him." "Why, you mean the business I built from nothing? The one that paid for your entire education?" She'd looked uncomfortable. "I just mean, the construction thing. It sounds so manual. Maybe just say you're retired or something." I should have said no right then. Should have told her that if Samuel couldn't accept me as I was, then he wasn't worthy of her. But she was my only child, my only family, and I was terrified of losing her. So I'd agreed to downplay my success. What I didn't realize was that Sarah would take it a step further and begin actively hiding it. When they moved in together, Samuel noticed Sarah seemed to have more money than her teacher's salary should allow. She told him she'd inherited some money from her grandmother, my late wife's mother, who'd actually died without a penny to her name. When Samuel wondered how she could afford her car payments, she said she'd gotten a great deal through a friend. When he questioned how she managed to pay for her half of their expensive dinners and weekend trips, she claimed she was just good at budgeting. Lie after lie after lie, all to maintain the fiction that Samuel was the successful provider, and I was, what? Nothing. No one. A man so irrelevant that he could be erased from the story entirely. The phone rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. It was Sarah, her voice bright and cheerful, still riding the high of her wedding day. "Daddy, thank you so much for coming yesterday. It meant the world to me to have you there." "Did it?" I asked quietly. "Of course it did. Why would you ask that?" I could have confronted her then. Could have asked her why she'd let Samuel humiliate me, why she'd lied about me being dead, why she'd chosen to protect his feelings over mine. Instead, I found myself asking a different question. "Sarah, does Samuel know who paid for the wedding?" There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, does he know where the money came from?" Another pause, longer this time. "Daddy, we've talked about this. Samuel thinks his parents covered most of it, and that I saved up for the rest. You agreed to keep things simple." Simple. That was one way to put it. "And he still doesn't know about the apartment, the car, any of it?" "No. And that's how it needs to stay." Her voice had developed an edge. "We're building a life together, Daddy. Samuel needs to feel like he's the man of the house. Surely you can understand that." What I understood was that my daughter had chosen to build her marriage on a foundation of lies, and I was expected to be complicit in my own erasure. "Of course," I said finally. "I understand." After I hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, looking at those receipts, thinking about the choices I'd made and the choices my daughter had made. I'd thought I was being a good father, supporting her quietly, letting her husband maintain his dignity. But what I'd actually done was enable a deception that had made me invisible in my own daughter's life. Samuel had no idea that the life he was so proud of providing was actually being provided by the old waiter he'd dismissed so cruelly. And Sarah seemed determined to make sure he never found out. But as I would learn very soon, some secrets are too big to stay buried forever. 3 days after the wedding, I was still wrestling with what had happened when my phone rang. It was Margaret Thornton, an old friend who'd been at the reception. Margaret and I had known each other for years through various business dealings, and she was one of the few people who knew the truth about my financial situation. "Robert," she said without preamble, "I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer." "Of course, Margaret. What's on your mind? That young man who married your daughter, does he have any idea who you are?" I was quiet for a long moment. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. I saw what happened at the reception. I heard him call you the waiter. I watched Sarah go along with it, and I've been stewing about it for 3 days." Margaret had always been direct, one of the qualities I'd always appreciated about her. She'd built her own successful real estate empire and had no patience for games or pretense. "It's complicated, Margaret." "It's not complicated at all, Robert. It's wrong. That boy is living a lifestyle he could never afford on his own, and he doesn't even know it. Worse, he's treating the man who's making it all possible like hired help." Sarah asked me to keep things quiet. She says it would hurt Samuel's pride if he knew. Margaret made a sound of disgust. "His pride? What about your dignity? Robert, I've known you for 15 years. You built Chambers Construction from nothing. You've employed hundreds of people. You've contributed millions to this community. And your own daughter lets her husband treat you like you're invisible? She's my only family, Margaret. I can't risk losing her." "You've already lost her, Robert. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet." Her words stung because I knew she was right. The daughter who'd laughed while her husband humiliated me wasn't the little girl I'd raised. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who valued appearances more than truth, image more than integrity. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "I've been thinking about this and I realized something. At the reception, when Samuel was talking about his business success, he mentioned some specific deals. I checked with my contacts, and Robert, that boy is living paycheck to paycheck. His company is barely staying afloat. The big promotion he was bragging about? It was a lateral move with a fancy title, but no real raise. This didn't surprise me. I'd suspected Samuel was exaggerating his success, but I'd never investigated. I'd simply covered whatever shortfalls Sarah needed me to cover. "Margaret, why are you telling me this?" "Because someone needs to shake you out of this stupor you're in. You're being used, Robert. And the worst part is, you're allowing it to happen." After I hung up with Margaret, I couldn't shake the conversation. She was right, of course. I'd been so focused on maintaining peace, on making sure Sarah was happy, that I'd lost sight of what was actually happening. The breaking point came later that week. I was at the grocery store, a simple errand that usually brought me some peace. I liked the normalcy of it, the routine of checking items off a list, the brief conversations with neighbors. It was a reminder that despite my wealth, I was still just a regular person with regular needs. That's where I ran into Patricia Hendricks, Samuel's mother. I was in the produce section, examining apples, when I heard her voice behind me. She was talking to another woman, someone I didn't recognize. "Oh, it was just devastating," Patricia was saying in that theatrical way some people have when they're enjoying their own drama. "We had no idea Sarah came from such humble circumstances." I froze, an apple still in my hand. "The poor girl," Patricia continued. "Apparently her father died when she was young, and she's been essentially on her own ever since. She works as a teacher, barely making ends meet. It's remarkable that Samuel was able to give her such a beautiful wedding." "How generous of your son," the other woman replied. "Oh, Samuel is wonderful. He's been supporting her for years, even before they were married. Paid off her student loans, helped her get a better apartment, bought her a car. He has such a big heart." My grip tightened on the apple until I was surprised it didn't burst. "And that man at the wedding," Patricia went on, "the one who was pretending to be family? Apparently Sarah has a soft spot for the service workers. She lets them get too familiar sometimes." Samuel had to gently put him in his place. How awkward that must have been. Terribly awkward. But Samuel handled it with such grace. He's so protective of Sarah. Doesn't want people taking advantage of her kindness. I stood there listening to this woman, whose son's entire lifestyle I was funding, describe me as a charity case that my daughter was too kind to turn away. The irony was so thick I could taste it. But what made it worse was realizing that this wasn't just Patricia's interpretation. This was the story Sarah had told them. She hadn't just failed to correct Samuel's humiliation at the wedding. She'd actively built a narrative around it afterward. I paid for my groceries and drove home in a daze. Once there, I did something I'd never done before. I called Samuel's office. "Samuel Hendricks, please," I told the receptionist. "May I ask who's calling?" "This is Robert Chambers. I'm calling about a business matter." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chambers, but Mr. Hendricks is in meetings all afternoon. Can I take a message?" "Actually, let me try his direct line. We've been working together on some financial arrangements." Another pause. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand. Are you perhaps thinking of someone else? Mr. Hendricks handles marketing campaigns for small businesses. He doesn't typically work on financial arrangements." The pieces clicked into place. Samuel wasn't just exaggerating his success. He was living in complete denial about his actual position. The big deals he'd been discussing at the wedding, the promotion he'd bragged about, the successful business ventures, all of it was fantasy. "I see," I said quietly. "Thank you for your time." That evening, I did something else I'd never done. I hired a private investigator. I told myself it was just to get the facts, to understand exactly what I was dealing with. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for war. The investigator's report arrived 2 days later. Samuel Hendricks was indeed struggling financially. His credit cards were maxed out. He'd been passed over for promotion twice in the past year. The marketing firm where he worked was actually considering layoffs, and Samuel was likely to be among the first to go. But the most interesting part of the report was what it revealed about Samuel's gambling problem. He'd been hiding debts for years, small amounts at first, but growing larger. He owed money to several people, amounts that would have destroyed his credit and possibly cost him his job if they'd come to light. Except they hadn't come to light because someone had been quietly paying them off, Sarah, which meant I had been paying them off through the money I gave Sarah for emergencies and unexpected expenses. The man who'd called me just the waiter was not only living off my money, he was using my money to cover his gambling debts while bragging about his success to anyone who would listen. I sat in my study that night, the investigator's report spread out before me, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, clean anger. Not the confused hurt I'd felt at the wedding, not the sad resignation I'd been carrying for days. This was clarity, sharp and bright and empowering. Samuel Hendricks had humiliated me in front of 200 people while living off my money. My daughter had not only allowed it, but had actively participated in creating the lie that made it possible. And they had no idea that I knew the truth. For the first time since the wedding, I smiled, because I was about to teach them both a lesson about the consequences of taking someone for granted. The next morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. "Margaret," I said when she answered, "I need a favor. You know that article Forbes is doing about successful entrepreneurs who've stayed humble? The one where they wanted to interview me? Yes, you turned them down, said you didn't want the publicity. Well, I've changed my mind. Can you give them my number?" There was a pause. "Robert, what are you planning?" I'm planning to stop being invisible. The Forbes interview was scheduled for the following week. By the time it was published, everyone in our small city would know exactly who Robert Chambers was and what he'd accomplished, including Samuel and Sarah. I could hardly wait to see their faces when they realized that the old waiter they dismissed so casually was about to become very, very visible indeed. The Forbes article hit the newsstands on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. The piece was titled, "The Humble Millionaire: How Robert Chambers Built an Empire While Flying Under the Radar." It featured a full-page photo of me in my study, surrounded by awards and commendations I'd never displayed publicly. The article detailed how I'd built Chambers Construction from a one-man operation into the largest contracting firm in the region, before selling it for $50 million. But more than the business success, the article focused on my philosophy of quiet philanthropy. It mentioned the scholarship fund I'd established at the local community college, the low-income housing projects I'd funded, the disaster relief efforts I had supported over the years. All things I'd done without fanfare, without publicity, because I believed good works should speak for themselves. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally seeking publicity for the exact opposite reason, not to celebrate my good works, but to expose the lies that had been built around my silence. Margaret called first. "Robert, I just read the article. It's beautiful. You should have done this years ago." "Better late than never," I said. "Have you heard from Sarah yet?" "Not yet, but I will." I was right. Sarah called at 2:17 p.m. I know the exact time because I watched her name flash on my phone screen and decided to let it ring a few times before answering. "Daddy?" Her voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk." "I'm sure we do." "I'm coming over. Samuel's with me." "I'll be here." They arrived 30 minutes later. Samuel looked like he'd been hit by a truck. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, his face pale. Sarah was maintaining her composure better, but I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the way she held her purse clutched against her chest like a shield. I invited them into my living room, the same room where I'd hosted countless family dinners, where Sarah had brought Samuel to meet me for the first time 3 years ago. Everything looked the same, but the dynamic was completely different now. Samuel sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He couldn't seem to look directly at me. "Daddy," Sarah began, "about the article." "What about it?" "You should have told us you were doing it. We could have prepared." "Prepared for what? For people to know the truth?" Samuel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Chambers, I owe you an apology." I looked at him steadily. "Do you? For what, specifically?" He swallowed hard. For what I said at the wedding. I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" "I didn't know who you were." "But you knew who you thought I was, and you decided that person was worth humiliating in front of 200 people. Samuel's face flushed red. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected. "There's a difference." Sarah leaned forward. "Daddy, please. Samuel feels terrible about this. We both do. But making this public, having our friends and family read about it in Forbes, that's not fair." "Fair?" I felt that clean anger rising again. "Let's talk about fair, Sarah. Is it fair that Samuel has been living a lifestyle funded entirely by my money while believing he's earned it all himself?" Samuel looked confused. "What do you mean?" I turned to Sarah. "You haven't told him yet, have you?" "Told me what?" Samuel looked back and forth between us. Sarah's composure finally cracked. "Daddy, please don't do this." "Tell him, Sarah. Tell your husband where the money for your apartment comes from. Tell him who paid off your student loans. Tell him who's been covering the shortfall between his actual salary and the life you've been living." Samuel's face went white. "Sarah?" She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was going to tell you eventually. You were so proud of being able to provide for me. I didn't want to hurt your feelings." "You mean you didn't want him to know that every single thing he's proud of accomplishing has been handed to him by the man he called just the waiter," I said. Samuel stood up abruptly, then sat back down as if his legs wouldn't support him. "The apartment? I pay the rent," I said. "All of it. Samuel, your actual income qualifies you for a studio apartment in the worst part of town. The car? Mine. The vacation to Europe? Mine. The wedding? Every penny." Samuel buried his face in his hands. Oh God, what have I done? You've been living a lie, I said simply. Both of you have. Sarah finally found her voice. We can explain everything. We can fix this. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been ashamed of me for years. So ashamed that you've built an elaborate fiction to hide my existence from your husband. That's not true, isn't it? At the wedding, when Samuel called me the waiter, what did you do? She was quiet. You laughed, Sarah. You laughed at your own father being humiliated, and then you told his parents that your father was dead. Samuel looked up sharply. What? Ask your wife about the story she told your parents. Ask her about the fictional father who died when she was young, leaving her all alone in the world. Samuel turned to Sarah with an expression of complete bewilderment. You told my parents your father was dead? I panicked, she whispered. After what you said, I didn't know how to explain, so you decided it was easier to kill me off than to admit I existed, I said. The room fell silent except for Sarah's quiet sobbing. Samuel sat staring at his hands, occasionally shaking his head as if trying to process what he was learning. Finally, he looked up at me. Mr. Chambers, I don't know what to say. I've been living off your charity while treating you like nothing, like no one. Yes, he took a shaky breath. What can I do to make this right? I studied him for a long moment. Samuel looked genuinely devastated, and I found myself wondering if there might be a path forward. Maybe this could be a turning point, a chance for honesty and rebuilding. Then Sarah spoke. This is ridiculous, she said, her tears stopping as suddenly as they'd started. Yes, we made mistakes. Yes, we should have handled things differently. But Daddy, you're acting like we committed some terrible crime. I stared at her in disbelief. I mean, she continued, you've always said you wanted to help me. You've always said family comes first. Now you're upset because I accepted your help? I'm upset because you hid me, Sarah. You erased me from your life. I protected you, she snapped. Do you think Samuel's parents would have been impressed if they knew my father was in construction? Do you think they would have welcomed me into their family if they knew I came from that kind of background? The words hung in the air like poison. Samuel looked at her with an expression of horror, but Sarah was too far gone to notice. I gave you a better life than you could have had otherwise, she continued. I made you part of something bigger, something more respectable. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating us in a national magazine? I stood up slowly. Sarah, I want you to listen very carefully to what you just said. I said the truth. You said that you were ashamed of me. That construction work isn't respectable. That being part of Samuel's family was more important than being my daughter. I didn't say that. You said exactly that. I walked to the mantel where I kept a photo of Sarah's mother. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become. Sarah gasped as if I'd slapped her. How dare you bring her into this? Your mother married a construction worker, Sarah, a man who worked with his hands, who came home dirty every night, who built his business one job at a time. Are you saying she made a mistake? That she should have been ashamed of me too? That's different. No, it's not. The only difference is that now I have money, but you're still ashamed of how I earned it. Samuel finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Sarah, stop. Please just stop talking. But Sarah was beyond reason now. You want to know the truth, Daddy? Fine. Yes, I was embarrassed. Yes, I thought it was better if Samuel's family didn't know about your background. And yes, I think I made the right choice. Look at how they treated you at the wedding when they thought you were a waiter. Imagine how much worse it would have been if they knew you were in construction. They treated me that way because you let them, I said quietly. You could have told them the truth at any time. You chose not to. Because I was protecting all of us. No, Sarah, you were protecting yourself. And now I'm going to protect myself. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared earlier that day. Inside were copies of every bank transfer, every payment, every loan I'd made to support Sarah's lifestyle over the past 5 years. This is a record of every penny I've given you, I said, handing the folder to Samuel. $437,000 over 5 years. Your car payments, rent, credit card bills, vacation expenses, wedding costs. And yes, Samuel, the gambling debts you thought Sarah didn't know about. Samuel's face went gray. How did you... I hired an investigator. I know about the poker games, the sports betting, the money you borrowed from your coworkers. I know Sarah has been using my money to keep you afloat while you've been lying to everyone about your success. Sarah stood up sharply. That's enough. No, it's not nearly enough. But it's all you're going to get. I looked at both of them, these two people I'd supported and sacrificed for, who'd repaid my generosity with lies and humiliation. As of today, the money stops. All of it. Sarah went pale. You can't do that. Watch me. Samuel was flipping through the folder with shaking hands. This can't be right. This says you've been paying our rent for 3 years? Every month. And the car payments? Yours and Sarah's. He looked up at me with something approaching panic. Mr. Chambers, we can't afford. Without your help, we'll lose everything. Yes, I said simply. You will. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The truth was finally out, and justice was about to be served. The morning after my confrontation with Sarah and Samuel, I sat in my bank's private office with my financial advisor, Marcus Chen. We'd been working together for over a decade, and he'd never seen me move with such decisive purpose. Are you certain about this, Robert? Marcus asked, as he reviewed the documents I'd brought. This is comprehensive. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The papers spread across his mahogany desk represented the complete financial separation I was implementing. Every automatic transfer to Sarah's account canceled. The co-signed lease on their apartment. I was invoking the clause that allowed me to withdraw as guarantor with 30 days' notice. The car loans for both vehicles, since they were technically in my name with Sarah and Samuel as authorized users, I was repossessing them. The apartment lease termination will take effect in 30 days, Marcus said, making notes. The cars can be collected whenever you're ready. What about the credit cards? Those too. Every card where I'm the primary account holder gets canceled today. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Robert, I have to ask, are you doing this out of anger? Because decisions made in anger? I'm not angry anymore, Marcus. I'm clear-headed, for the first time in years. And I was. The rage I'd felt after reading the investigator's report had burned through me and left something else behind. A cold, precise understanding of what needed to happen. My phone had been ringing constantly since Sarah and Samuel left my house the day before. 17 missed calls from Sarah, 12 from Samuel, even 3 from Patricia Hendricks. I'd listened to exactly one voicemail, Samuel's voice cracking with desperation. Mr. Chambers, please call me back. We need to work this out. I'll do anything to make this right. But I didn't call back. I was done being reactive. From now on, I would control the timing and terms of every interaction. There's one more thing, I told Marcus, pulling out another document. I want to establish a trust for my eventual estate. Everything goes to charity. The scholarship fund, the hospital foundation, homeless shelters. Nothing to Sarah. Robert, that's a major decision. You might want to think about it for a while. Oh, I've been thinking about it for years without realizing it. Every time Sarah chose Samuel's comfort over my dignity, every time she prioritized appearances over truth, she was making her choice. Now, I'm making mine. Marcus processed the paperwork with the efficiency I'd come to expect from him. By noon, every financial tie to Sarah and Samuel had been severed. They would discover this gradually over the next few days as cards were declined and automatic payments failed. But I wasn't finished. That afternoon, I drove to the apartment complex where Sarah and Samuel lived, the luxury building with the marble lobby and concierge service that they could never have afforded on their own. I'd been here dozens of times, usually dropping off gifts or helping with some emergency expense. The property manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, knew me as Sarah's father and emergency contact. Mr. Chambers, she said when I arrived at her office, how nice to see you. Is everything all right with Sarah's lease? Actually, that's what I'm here to discuss. I need to remove myself as guarantor, effective immediately. Her expression shifted. Oh, may I ask why? Personal reasons? I assume you'll need to requalify them based on their actual income? Mrs. Rodriguez pulled up their file on her computer, and I watched her face change as she reviewed the numbers. Mr. Chambers, I'm looking at their application and, well, without your guarantee, they don't qualify for this unit. Their reported income is only $75,000 annually. Our minimum requirement for this apartment is $120,000. I understand. They'll need to either find a new guarantor or relocate. That's their decision to make. I left Mrs. Rodriguez's office knowing that Sarah and Samuel had 30 days to either triple Samuel's income or find somewhere else to live. Neither seemed likely. My next stop was the car dealership where I'd co-signed their loans. This was easier. Since the vehicles were technically mine, I simply arranged to have them repossessed. The BMW would be picked up from Samuel's office parking lot the next morning. Sarah's Lexus would be collected from the school where she taught. As I drove home in my old pickup truck, the same vehicle I'd been driving for years while paying for their luxury cars, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: freedom. That evening, Margaret called. "Robert, I heard through the grapevine that some interesting things are happening. Care to share?" "I'm simply correcting some financial arrangements that had gotten out of hand." Margaret laughed. "That's the most diplomatic way I've ever heard someone describe cutting off spoiled children. How are they taking it?" "I assume I'll find out soon enough." I was right. At 11:47 p.m., Sarah showed up at my door. I could see her through the peephole, pacing on my front porch, her phone pressed to her ear. She was clearly agitated. I didn't answer. She rang the doorbell again, then started knocking. "Daddy, I know you're in there. We need to talk about this." I went to bed and left her on the porch. The next morning brought a series of discoveries that I watched unfold from a distance. Samuel arrived at work to find his BMW being loaded onto a tow truck. According to my source at his office, I'd asked Margaret to check, he stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes on the phone, his voice carrying across the lot as he tried to understand what was happening. Sarah's day started even worse. Her credit card was declined when she tried to buy coffee before school. Then her Lexus disappeared from the faculty parking lot during her lunch break. The school secretary later told Margaret's friend, news travels fast in a small city, that Sarah had spent her planning period crying in the bathroom. But the real moment of reckoning came that evening. I was reading in my study when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I saw Samuel getting out of what appeared to be a rental car. He walked to my door with the measured pace of a man who'd spent all day preparing for an unpleasant conversation. I let him ring the bell twice before answering. "Mr. Chambers, thank you for seeing me." He looked terrible. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled. His shirt wrinkled, his tie crooked, his hair uncombed. More than that, he looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. "Samuel?" "Sir, I need to ask you directly. Is this about what happened at the wedding?" "Partly. Because if it is, I understand completely. What I did was unforgivable. I humiliated you, and I've been thinking about it non-stop since I read that article. I had no idea who you were, what you'd accomplished, what you meant to Sarah." "No, you didn't. And you didn't care to find out." He nodded miserably. "You're right. I made assumptions based on appearances. I was a snob and an ass, and I'm deeply ashamed of myself." "Are you? Or are you ashamed that you got caught?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Can I be honest with you? That would be refreshing. When I first met Sarah, I thought I was getting lucky. Beautiful woman. Good job, seemed to have her life together. I didn't question how she could afford the things she could afford. I just enjoyed it. And when you started to wonder? She always had explanations. Inheritance money, good budgeting, deals from friends. I wanted to believe her because it meant I didn't have to feel guilty about not being able to provide those things myself. At least he was being honest now. "The gambling?" I said. His face flushed red. "You know about that too." "I know Sarah's been using my money to cover your debts for 2 years. "I didn't know that. I swear to God I thought she was using her own money. I thought she was just helping me get back on my feet. With money that came from the man you called just the waiter." Samuel winced. "Yes. Tell me something, Samuel. If you'd known the truth from the beginning, that Sarah's father was successful, that he'd been supporting both of you, would you have treated me differently at the wedding?" He started to answer quickly, then stopped. I could see him really thinking about it. "I'd like to say yes," he said finally. I'd like to believe I would have been respectful regardless. But honestly, if I'd known you were wealthy, I probably would have been trying to impress you instead of dismissing you. So your respect is conditional on someone's bank account? Apparently, yes. And that makes me a terrible person. I studied his face. There was something different about Samuel now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by what seemed like genuine shame. But I'd been fooled before. What do you want from me, Samuel? I want to know what I can do to fix this, not just the money. I know that's gone, and I know we don't deserve it back. But is there any way to make amends for how I treated you? That depends. On what? On whether you're sorry for what you did or sorry for the consequences. Samuel was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Chambers, I need to tell you something. This morning, when my car got repossessed, I called my boss to explain why I was late. I had to tell him about my financial situation, about the gambling debts, about everything. He fired me. I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but recognition of genuine consequence. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not. And you shouldn't be. I've been living a lie for years, and it's all falling apart now. But you know what the worst part is? What? The worst part is that Sarah is angrier at you than she is at me. She keeps saying you're being cruel, that you're punishing us for a simple mistake. She doesn't understand that what we did was wrong. This was what I'd feared, that even losing everything wouldn't teach Sarah the lesson she needed to learn. She wants to come talk to you again, Samuel continued. She thinks she can convince you to change your mind. I told her not to bother. Why? Because I finally understand something. You didn't cut us off to punish us. You cut us off to save yourself. For the first time since this all began, I felt a glimmer of respect for Samuel. What will you do now? I asked. Start over, I guess. Find a job that actually pays enough to support the lifestyle I can afford. Stop gambling. Try to become the man Sarah thought she was marrying. And if you can't, Samuel's laugh was hollow, then I guess Sarah will find out what it's like to be married to who I really am instead of who I pretended to be. After he left, I sat in my study thinking about our conversation. Samuel seemed genuinely changed by what had happened, but change that comes from losing everything isn't the same as change that comes from understanding why you were wrong in the first place. More importantly, Sarah still didn't understand, and until she did, there could be no real reconciliation. But I was no longer waiting for her to understand. I was moving forward with my own life, free from the burden of supporting people who had no respect for the sacrifice that support required. For the first time in years, I was sleeping peacefully through the night. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my new home in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the Blue Ridge Mountains catch the morning light. The house was smaller than my old place, but it sat on 20 acres of pristine forest with a creek running through it. For the first time in decades, I was living exactly where and how I wanted to live. The move had been Margaret's idea. Robert, she'd said 3 months after I'd cut ties with Sarah and Samuel, you've spent your entire adult life in that city, building a business, raising a daughter, being who other people needed you to be. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? I couldn't remember. So I'd sold my house in Sacramento, the one where Sarah grew up, where I'd hosted countless dinners trying to build a relationship with Samuel, where I'd learned that my own daughter was ashamed of me. The sale netted me enough to buy this mountain property with cash and still have plenty left over. I'd also sold my construction company to my former partner, Jim Caldwell, who'd been wanting to buy me out for years. Between the house sale and the business sale, I had more liquid assets than I'd ever had in my life, and, for the first time, no one depending on me to support them. The freedom was intoxicating. My new routine was simple and satisfying. I woke up when I felt like it, usually around sunrise. I had coffee on the deck while listening to the birds wake up. I spent my mornings working in the garden I was building behind the house, something I'd never had time for when I was running a business and supporting a family. In the afternoons, I volunteered at a local nonprofit that built homes for low-income families. It felt good to be back doing actual construction work, using my hands, teaching young people the skills I'd spent a lifetime developing. The kids I worked with didn't know about my wealth or my business success. They just knew me as Robert, the old guy who could frame a house faster than men half his age. Evenings I read, cooked simple meals, and video called with Margaret, who'd become even closer friends since my move. Sometimes I drove into town for dinner or a movie. I'd joined a hiking group and was rediscovering muscles I hadn't used in years. It was a quiet life, a simple life, and it was mine. The first letter from Sarah arrived 2 weeks after I'd moved. She'd tracked down my new address somehow, probably through Margaret, though Margaret denied it. The letter was 4 pages long, filled with apologies, explanations, and pleas for me to come home. I read it once, then burned it in my fireplace. The second letter came a month later. This one was shorter, angrier. Sarah accused me of abandoning my family when we needed each other most. She said I was being petty and vindictive, that I was throwing away years of love over one mistake. I burned that one too. The third letter was different. It arrived just after Christmas, and it was only 1 page long. "Daddy," it began, "Samuel left me." I set the letter down and poured myself a glass of wine before continuing. He said he couldn't handle the debt, the embarrassment, the way people look at us now. He said he married someone who wasn't real, and he couldn't figure out how to love the real me. He moved back in with his parents last week. I'm living in a studio apartment now. It's all I can afford on my teacher's salary. I had to sell most of my furniture to pay the deposits. I work a second job at the mall on weekends to make ends meet. I know you're angry with me. I know I hurt you. But I'm your daughter, and I need help. Not money. I know that's over, but I need to know that I still have a father. Please call me. I read the letter 3 times, waiting to feel something. Guilt, sympathy, the old protective instinct that had driven so many years of my life. But all I felt was a distant sadness for the girl Sarah used to be before she became someone I didn't recognize. I didn't call. Instead, I wrote my own letter, not to Sarah, but to my lawyer, finalizing the charitable trust that would distribute my estate after my death, the scholarships for trade school students, the fund for affordable housing, the endowment for the children's hospital. Sarah's name appeared nowhere in the document. Spring in the mountains was spectacular. I spent my days hiking trails I was still discovering, learning the names of wildflowers, photographing wildlife. I'd bought a good camera for the first time in my life and was discovering a talent I never knew I had. That's where I was, on a trail about 5 miles from my house, trying to get a shot of a red-tailed hawk when my phone rang. Margaret. "Robert, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." "Sarah?" "She's in the hospital." I felt my chest tighten. "What happened?" "Car accident, nothing life-threatening, but she broke her leg and has a concussion. She's been asking for you." I was quiet for a long moment, watching the hawk circle overhead. "Robert? I'm here. Are you going to see her?" "No." "Robert?" "Margaret, if Sarah wants to see me, she knows where I am. She can come here when she's healed." "That's pretty cold even for you." "Is it?" "She's had 6 months to figure out how to apologize meaningfully. Instead, she sent me letters blaming everyone but herself for her situation. A hospital bed doesn't change that." Margaret sighed. "You're a harder man than I thought you were." "I'm a man who finally learned to value himself." But that night I didn't sleep well. Images of Sarah as a little girl kept surfacing. Her first day of school, Christmas mornings, the time she'd fallen off her bike and cried until I kissed her scraped knee better. The next morning, I called the hospital. "Sarah Hendricks, please." "One moment." When Sarah answered, her voice was weak but alert. "Daddy? I heard about the accident. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." She paused. "I can't believe you called. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Are you coming to see me?" I looked out my window at the mountains, at the garden I'd been building, at the life I'd constructed from the pieces of my old one. "No, Sarah, I'm not." Silence. "But I want you to know something," I continued. "I don't hate you. I'm not trying to punish you. I just can't be the father you want me to be anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means I can't pretend that what happened at your wedding was just a mistake. It means I can't go back to being invisible so you can be comfortable. It means I'm living my own life now, and there's no room in it for people who are ashamed of me." "I was never ashamed of you." "Yes, you were. And maybe that's understandable. Maybe I didn't give you enough to be proud of, but I gave you everything I had, and it wasn't enough. So now I'm giving it to myself." Sarah was crying. "Daddy, please. I know I made mistakes, but you're all the family I have left." "That's not true, Sarah. You have family. You just have to decide what kind of family you want to be part of." "I don't understand." "When you're ready to be proud of having a construction worker for a father, when you're ready to stop hiding who I am and what I do, when you're ready to build a relationship based on truth instead of convenient lies, then call me. Until then, take care of yourself." I hung up before she could respond. That afternoon, I met Margaret for coffee in downtown Asheville. She'd driven up from Charlotte to check on me, though she claimed it was just for the mountain air. "You look good," she said, settling into the chair across from me at the little cafe I'd come to love. "Peaceful. I feel peaceful. No regrets about the phone call?" "None." Margaret studied my face. "You really mean that?" "I do. For 63 years, I've been trying to be the person other people needed me to be. My wife needed me to be ambitious, so I built a business. Sarah needed me to be generous, so I gave her everything. Samuel needed me to be invisible, so I hid myself. But no one ever asked what I needed. What do you need?" I gestured around us, at the mountains visible through the cafe windows, at the simple life I'd built, at the peace I'd found in choosing myself for once. "This. I need to be enough just as I am." Margaret smiled. "You always were, Robert. You just forgot for a while." That evening, I was working in my garden when I heard a car coming up my long driveway. For a moment, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Sarah. But the car that emerged from the trees was a small sedan I didn't recognize. A woman got out, someone I'd never seen before. She was about my age, silver-haired, wearing jeans and hiking boots. She approached cautiously, the way people do when they're not sure they're at the right place. "Are you Robert Chambers?" "I am." "My name is Elena Vasquez. I volunteer at the Habitat for Humanity chapter where you've been helping out." "All right. I remember you from the project meeting last week," she smiled. "I hope you don't mind me just showing up like this, but I was in the neighborhood and I thought, well, I brought you something." She went back to her car and returned with a small potted plant, a mountain laurel sapling. "I noticed you were starting a garden, and I thought this might fit in. Mountain laurel is the state flower of North Carolina. It's beautiful when it blooms, and it's strong enough to handle the winters up here." I took the pot, touched by the unexpected kindness. "That's very thoughtful. Thank you. Would you like some help planting it?" I looked at this woman who'd driven 20 minutes up a mountain road to bring me a flower, asking for nothing in return but the chance to help me plant it. I'd like that very much. As we worked together in the fading light, Elena told me about her own life. She'd been widowed 3 years ago, had moved to Asheville to be closer to her daughter, had found purpose in volunteering and hiking, and tending her own garden. "It's a different kind of life than I expected," she said, as we patted soil around the sapling's roots. "Quieter, simpler, but good." "I know exactly what you mean." When we finished planting, I offered her a glass of wine on the deck. We sat watching the stars come out over the mountains, talking about books and travel, and the satisfaction of building things with your hands. Elena left around 10, but not before accepting my invitation to join me for a hike the following weekend. After her taillights disappeared down the mountain, I sat alone on my deck, thinking about the strange turns life takes. A year ago, I'd been supporting 2 adults who were ashamed of me. Tonight, a woman I barely knew had driven up a mountain to bring me a flower. The difference wasn't just the kindness of the gesture. It was that Elena saw me, the real me, not the me who could be useful to her. She didn't need me to be anyone other than who I was. 6 months later, Elena and I were sharing morning coffee on the deck when my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I'd heard through Margaret that she'd been doing better, working 2 jobs, living within her means, apparently learning what it felt like to stand on her own. "Daddy?" "Hello, Sarah. I'm in Asheville, at the coffee shop downtown, the one on Lexington Avenue." I looked at Elena, who was pretending not to listen while very obviously listening. "I see. I was wondering if I could come see you, if you'd let me." "Oh, Maud." I was quiet for a moment, thinking about the year that had passed, about the peace I'd found, about the life I'd built. "Why?" I asked. Because I want to meet my father. You've known me your whole life, Sarah. No, I haven't. I've known the man who paid for my life. I've never known Robert Chambers, the person. And I'd like to, if you'll let me. I looked out at the mountains, at the garden Elena and I had expanded together, at the mountain laurel that was now taller than my waist and covered in white blooms. Do you know how to get here? I have the address. Come ahead. An hour later, I watched Sarah's modest Honda make its way up my driveway. She got out slowly, looking around at the property with something like wonder. She was thinner than I remembered, her clothes simpler, her face older. But there was something different in her posture, something more real. This is beautiful, Daddy. Thank you. She approached the deck where Elena and I were waiting. I introduced them, and Elena, with the wisdom of someone who understood family complications, excused herself to go work in the back garden. Sarah and I sat across from each other, the Blue Ridge Mountains stretching out behind us. I brought you something, she said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. I opened it to find a framed photograph. Sarah and me, from when she was about 10 years old. We were at a construction site, both wearing hard hats, both grinning at the camera. I was showing her how to read a blueprint. I found this in my things when I was packing up my old life, she said. I remember that day. You took me to work with you because my babysitter was sick. I was so proud to tell everyone at school that my dad built houses. I studied the photograph, remembering that day, remembering the little girl who'd been excited to learn about rebar and foundation pours. What happened to her? I asked quietly. She grew up and got stupid, Sarah said, tears starting in her eyes. She started thinking that what other people thought mattered more than what was true. She started believing that love meant pretending to be someone you're not. I set the photograph down carefully. Daddy, I can't undo what I did at the wedding. I can't take back the lies I told or the way I let Samuel treat you. But I can tell you that I've spent this year learning who I am when I'm not pretending to be someone else. And what I learned is that I'm proud to be Robert Chambers' daughter, not because of your money. I know that's gone and I know I don't deserve it back, but because of who you are. Because you built something from nothing, because you work with your hands, because you helped people without asking for credit, because you taught me that worth comes from what you do, not what you have. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be fixed. But if there's any chance that we could start over, if there's any way you could let me be your daughter again, not the daughter who needs your money, but the daughter who's proud of your name, then I'd like to try. I looked at this woman who'd been my little girl, who'd broken my heart, who'd had to lose everything to find herself again. Are you sure you know what you're asking for, Sarah? Because I'm not the same man I was a year ago. I'm not going to hide who I am anymore. I'm not going to pretend to be less than I am to make other people comfortable. If you want to be my daughter, you get all of me, the construction worker, the businessman, the man who lives on a mountain and gardens and volunteers, and dates a woman named Elena, who brings me flowers. Sarah smiled through her tears. That sounds like exactly the father I want to have. I stood up and walked to the railing, looking out at the view that had become my sanctuary. There's something you need to understand, I said without turning around. The money is gone. Not just the support I was giving you, but the inheritance you might have expected. It's all going to charity when I die. Good. I turned to look at her. Good? Yes, good. You've spent your whole life helping people. Why should that stop just because you're gone? For the first time in over a year, I felt the stirring of what might eventually become forgiveness. Would you like to see the garden? I asked. I'd love to. Iced. As we walked around the property, Sarah asked questions about the plants, about my volunteer work, about Elena. Real questions, not the polite small talk that had characterized our relationship for years. When Elena emerged from the back garden, dirty and smiling, Sarah thanked her for taking care of me. He takes pretty good care of himself, Elena said, but I enjoy the company. Sarah stayed for lunch, which Elena cooked, while Sarah and I sat on the deck talking. Really talking, for the first time in years, about her job teaching, about the financial struggles she was working through, about what it felt like to build a life based on what she could actually afford rather than what she wanted. It's smaller, she said, but it's mine. That matters more than you might think. When it was time for her to leave, Sarah hugged me carefully, as if she wasn't sure she had the right. Can I come back sometime? I'd like that. Or maybe I could bring my hiking boots. Elena mentioned there are some good trails around here. There are. And Sarah? Yes? Next time, bring Samuel if you want to. I'd like to meet the man he's becoming, not the man he was pretending to be. Sarah's eyes widened. You'd do that? Everyone deserves a chance to start over, Sarah. Even him, even me, even you. That evening, after Sarah had driven back down the mountain and Elena had gone home, I sat on my deck with a glass of wine and the photograph Sarah had brought me. In it, I could see the father I'd been before I'd gotten lost in trying to be everything to everyone. And I could see the daughter who'd been proud of me before the world taught her to be ashamed. Maybe we could find our way back to something like that. Not the same thing. Too much had happened for that. But something new, something built on truth instead of convenience, on respect instead of obligation. The mountain laurel Elena had brought me was in full bloom now, its white flowers glowing in the moonlight, strong enough to handle the winters, beautiful enough to make the garden complete, just like the life I'd finally learned to build for myself. I raised my glass to the stars and toasted the man I'd become when I finally stopped trying to be the man everyone else needed me to be. At 63, I was finally home.